Well, I guess good. We'll start off with a good afternoon to all the folks on the East Coast. Good morning to the folks that are not on the Eastern Seaboard, and just have a happy Friday to everyone. I'm Brandon Garrett, the CEO of the National Minority Quality Forum. I'm here today with some folks that I know really well because I work with them intimately on a variety of policy issues and programming. I will before I turn it over to Dr. Donney John, who leads our advisory board, who will be moderating today, I just want to let everybody know that if you are happen to be in the New Orleans area on Wednesday, June 28th, the National Minority Quality Forum is partnering with a couple of folks like Xavier University, Excel, the National Medical Association, Centene, and Fund 2 Foundation to do a community health clinic in the area, providing a variety of services for everyone. So I'll be there on this call. Hey, most of this call will be there. I'll be there. Megan will be there, and Ashley will be there to help provide services. But you heard enough from me. We are to have another important topic about the diversity, need for diversity in clinical trials. And I'm going to turn it over to our very own Dr. Donney John. So Donney, take it away.
Thank you, Brandon, and happy Friday, everyone. I'm excited to have two very good distinguished guests to kind of lead a conversation about clinical trials, which is so important. We hear so much buzz about diversity and health disparities and kind of how do we get the work done. So allow me to introduce first Dr. Dr. Megan Thompson, Senior Health Policy Advisor for Congresswoman Robin Kelly, and Mrs. Cecilia Vaughn Guy, who's the Legislative Policy Fellow for Congresswoman Kelly. So this is going to be a very fluid conversation because we've heard about this topic many times. So I want to jump right into it and have Dr. Thompson give us a little background about what the legislation, why the legislation came, how it came about, and what's focusing on.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining the call to be a part of this discussion. It's so important, especially as we see ourselves reflecting on what happened to us through the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think this bill just, illuminates and highlights a lot of the discussion and the buzz associated with that. So first off, work for Representative Robin Kelly. She does a lot of work in the maternal health space. She will be reintroducing her comprehensive mama's language relatively soon. And I say that because there's always a tie-in to maternal health, right? Co-chair of the Bipartisan Maternity Care Caucus, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust. So I'm honored here to be speaking with you about this topic today. Why is this a topic we should care about? Well, Black patients account for just 5% of clinical trials, while white patients make up the vast majority. And we are starting to really see that play out a lot more in our society of what that means. And so the reason I brought up COVID-19 is because of the examples of the pulse oximeter to measure your O2 sats during a time where there was a respiratory disease and we needed to monitor that. And then we learned, it doesn't work that well in terms on darker skin tones. And that was something that was in the news, and that was something that was able to be highlighted. Once again, we started talking about the COVID-19 vaccines, and there was a lot of hesitancy, specifically in the Black community, and a lot of it came from, well, what is it? What's going on? How were the trials created? And so I think we're at a point where we're really trying to have these deep, hard conversations of what it means to diversify clinical trials. And, there were stories that were told about, unfortunately, even executives in the pharmaceutical space who was called and said, oh, you're not needed for this clinical trial with the COVID-19 vaccine. And because they know the system, they made some phone calls and they were accepted back into the space. And so what we were just trying to make sure is that medications, mental health treatments, behavioral interventions, equipment are all studied in a world where the population that is studied is diverse and encompassing of the population that will benefit from the innovation. And so what this bill does is say, it really complements what the NIH wants to do. So this bill is complementary and targets the National Institute of Health to increase clinical trial diversity. And how do we do that? We say, hey, if you are going to receive funding from the NIH, you need to have measurable goals of how to grab the population that you intend to serve. If you are looking at just throwing out blood pressure medications, and then you're looking at a new way to control high blood pressure, and we know that, let's just say 20% of the Black population has high blood pressure. Well, the study needs to be representative of that. And so what are the strategies that you're going to take to enroll these populations? And then what if there is a disease that doesn't impact certain populations, right? What if there's a disease that there's only 200 people, rare diseases, 200 people across the United States that have said disease? You need to account for that, but and tell us why you aren't able to gather the population that you need to gather. But we know there are so many barriers to clinical trials. We know that transportation can be a huge barrier, right? When you're in these clinical trials, you need to come up for follow-up care. So how do we make the process of being in a clinical trial less burdensome? And so are there things that we can utilize that we learned from the pandemic? I mean, telehealth, if we want to find silver linings from what we went through, that's something that has really increased our access to care. And so how do we make sure that we're using the education and the knowledge that we've obtained to make this process easier? But once again, there's another element, right, of education. And so how do we make sure that patients know about the clinical trials, but how do we make sure clinicians also know about the clinical trials? So a part of the bill is a public awareness campaign, just to say, hey, everybody, we need people to be aware that it is important to be a part of clinical trials. And yes, there are risks that need to be discussed with your clinicians, but like everything, if you read a bottle of Tylenol, there are risks associated with taking that medication. But we really want people to become advocates of their healthcare, being able to talk to their clinicians about their disease, what's out there, what are their opportunities, and really try to get them involved. So I know I've said a lot and happy to dig deeper, but that is the intent of what Representative Kelly is trying to do with this bill.
Well, thank you so much for all that information and kind of giving us the background, but also the details of this bill. So Cecilia, a question I have for you is, can you explain how this bill complements the draft guidance that the FDA put out around clinical trial diversity?
Absolutely. So first of all, again, thank you everybody for being here. I'm also going to take that doctor from you, Donney, because I'm working on it. So, I mean, we're going to call it manifestation. That's what we're going to do. And so I just want to really bring to everybody's attention that Rep. Kelly also helps co-lead the DEPICT Act, which really looks at making diversity plans a part of the mainstay for the FDA guidance. I mean, just so as a brief overview, the FDA kind of recommends that people do this. The NIH clinical trial bill really looks at getting the participation of the diverse groups in at the ground floor. So now we're not recommending, we're saying that you should do it. When clinical trial sponsors are thinking about putting the clinical trial together, they should really be looking at the prevalence of the disease and looking at ways that they can make sure they're going to include the populations that are impacted. And they should also be looking at the community organizations that they can tap, as well as making sure that they're looking at ways to eliminate the barriers to participation, just like Megan was alluding to during her overview of the bill. And then also it really looks at, okay, so if for whatever reason those metrics haven't been met, really making sure that we are going back to those same organizations, those community organizations, and being able to bring them back in to figure out what we can do to be better. And I just really want to re-highlight this idea of this education piece for the community members and for the healthcare community, because I think a lot of times some of the barriers to participation in clinical trials, at least from what I've heard for some of the physician community, is that there's a sense of caretaking, and there are going to be these barriers that people can't surmount. I don't want to give them like this false hope or give them something else to put on their oh my gosh worry list when they're already in a place where they're having some difficulty because they're facing maybe whatever issue, whatever illness they're facing. So really kind of looking at why it's important to be able to include people in clinical trials, what may be historic barriers that have been to participation, to really start thinking about the ways that we might think about presenting clinical trial information, or even the ways that we make clinical trials more accessible to folks.
Got to get myself off mute. Well, thank you so much for kind of giving the highlights of the comparisons of why it's complementary to the FDA proposal. You know, one of the things that both of you alluded to was the education, the public awareness campaign. And I can tell you from COVID-19 experience, one of the things that we did, my organization did in the state of Virginia, is that we surveyed healthcare professionals to kind of get their perspective on the COVID-19 vaccine. Because when it was first being developed, everyone's like, I'm not going to get it. You know, so it's like, all right, if we as healthcare professionals are not willing to go out and get a new vaccines that's going to solve COVID-19, how do we build trust amongst our patients and our community members? So we had taken the time to really survey healthcare professionals to get their idea. What are their concerns? So for this public health awareness campaign, how do you get healthcare professionals, not just physicians? I'm talking about MAs, nurses, pharmacists, other healthcare workers that are directly attached to the communities and working and living in some of these communities that are in so much of need of care. What's the plan to really engage the medical community, the healthcare professionals in general, not just the physician community, in terms of being more aware about the clinical trial diversity?
Yeah, and the thing that I think about the most during that time, and even in the blueprint to how we move this forward, are our stakeholders. Who are those trusted clinical people that we need to bring to the table to go out and spread the message? You know, I believe in looking at like the faith-based institutions, right? Like when we went out to where people were, and not just do this thing where sometimes the medical community can be very prescriptive and say, you just need to do it. Instead of saying, okay, I know you have concerns, what are they? And taking the time to really talk it through, because, you know, even in my world, trying to talk through how the vaccine was able to come to fruition so fast and so quickly. And so letting people know, hey, this is a global research project right now, to where everyone's pulling their part. There are resources and dollars. Sometimes it takes a long time because people aren't getting the funding right now to do their research. And, you know, unfortunately, during COVID-19, a lot of dollars pulled from other research. And so now we're trying to redistribute the dollars to make sure we're continuing the research in other places. But that was another element of how that was able to come to fruition so quickly. And then really trying to help people understand, what does mRNA even mean? Like, what does that look like? What are these different types? How are vaccines created? Oh, we're not using this older way of creating vaccines. We are using the newer technology. And, you know, so I definitely think the education, we have to make sure that we're bringing in community stakeholders, but bringing in people who, and giving people enough time to voice their concerns, while also receiving information at a point that is acceptable and receptible to them. Like, I think we have learned a lot of times, some of these webinars and outreach programs and being on social media and YouTube narratives, and all of these have actually created a process where people can talk more and engage and give more time. You know, when we were talking about, you know, using education like telehealth, it's helpful because we need to start looking at how much time do providers even have when they're able to talk on the phone? Do patients have the perception, or is there a reality that they actually get more time with the providers, you know, instead of actually going to a clinical space? And so when we're talking about education, I see it as just like, check all the boxes and all of the above programs. So we need to get the messages out on all the platforms. We need to make sure that the medical community is well aware, but we also need to make sure that we are putting it in a position and giving people space to receive information and not in the medical term, and giving them space to be vulnerable and state what all of their concerns are, and giving them the information. I mean, like, we were in barbershops, we were in hair salons. And to me, those are how you reach those vulnerable population and marginalized communities, by taking healthcare out of the four walls and putting it into the community.
Yeah, if I could just add, I mean, I was definitely not one of the people. I mean, I had initial vaccine hesitance, but the thing that really brought me into getting a vaccine was I was thinking about the health of my family. Like, I didn't want to be the person that brought COVID to my house and took my grandma out of here, if I could be 100% candid. So I think about really appealing to the humanity, because I think that, yeah, I mean, any medical professional, you know, has this medical background, but they're also a person. So there's a cultural background that they have too. And so I think there's a matter of really being able to just make sure that even when we're talking about, there's something about like this knowledge where you know, right, that piece, but there's also about this piece where like, but how does it apply to you? And what does it mean to you? How are you translating it? So I think, you know, even when I think about medical providers, I've always been taught that like you really aren't teaching anybody anything, or you don't know it if you can't say it in a way that your grandma can understand it or a 6-year-old can understand it. So, you know, just thinking about the fact that we have low health literacy in general in this country, thinking about the ways that we're making sure that we educate any of the healthcare providers that might be helping to educate people about clinical trials in a way where they can just use that language. They don't have to do that translation piece, because I think sometimes, because that's what you know, you can spit it out and you don't necessarily make sure that you're following up with the comprehension. And I think just from my own frontline experiences, I also know that people don't necessarily always ask questions just because of the way the medical model is, right? The doctor's right, or the provider's right? You're not thinking about it as being like a collaborative process. And so really just building on what Megan said, I think we want to make sure that we're looking at ways where we understanding that everybody is going through a mutual education process, and that they can think about ways that can work collaboratively to move forward, and think about ways that when they participate, they're not only impacting their own health, but they're also, you know, potentially impacting the health of their generations. So even thinking about that cultural and intergenerational component.
Those are all excellent points. And I think one thing that can also help is the recruitment of diverse researchers, getting these medical professionals from diverse backgrounds to serve as researchers, you know, giving them the opportunity, because it's not every day where you find a nurse or a pharmacist or other allied health professionals that can step into a role of a researcher, but there are plenty of those individuals out there that are eager for that type of opportunity. So it would be great to kind of see how we kind of connect, you know, the healthcare professionals from diverse backgrounds that want to participate and help lead research by giving them more opportunities. And some questions that are coming in that I want to ask you is accountability. You know, we talk about here's the bill, here's what we are expecting, but how do we measure success? As a nonprofit executive, I know we have to write logic models for our grants of what are we promising in the grant, how are we delivering it, and how are we held accountable. So in that same token, well, with this legislation, what's the logic model? What are the key metrics that we're expecting that should be delivered upon? And how do we hold people accountable to make sure that they follow through on it?
And no, I love those questions. And, you know, we are looking at, the gamut, right? We want people to look at race, ethnicity, age, you know, communities, where are they coming from, disease diagnosis. Like one of the things that we've been continually having conversations about right now is, like I said, maternal health is going to tie back. And, you know, a lot of research excludes pregnant or lactating women. But then, you know, if they get a diagnosis of cancer, you know, we need to make sure that we are also in that risk benefit analysis, making sure we're including everyone so we know how to treat people appropriately, especially with diseases that can be more fatal than others. You know, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there were questions about, oh, well, can pregnant and lactating women take this vaccine? And we had to go back and dig a little bit more as an afterthought than rather having that information on the forefront. But, you know, with the bill, we want to have a rationale for your goals. If it is a very rare disease and there's only 200 people in the entire nation who has it, and there might be 3 people who come from a minority population, that's a different story and a scenario than a disease that is prevalent in maybe 40% of the population, where Black and brown bodies might have a disproportionate impact due to the disease. So we want to know all this information right now, right? We want to know the strategies. What are the strategies that you're using to enroll these participants? How do you think you should go about that? Who are your clinicians? You know, we're talking about the workforce. How are you thinking through that your study design will educate people in an ethically appropriate manner to make sure that the participants understand the objectives that you're trying to get when they are in the trials? And so because this has been kind of an area that has been I don't want to say utilized, but because this is historically has not been happening, I think right now we're in a space where we don't really know a lot of the strategies that are being used. And so we're pushing the industry to take that step forward to do what needs to be done. And so as we move forward into this space, then we can start saying, okay, here are the best practices to really try to diversify these clinical trials. This is what's working. This is what we're seeing. These are the studies that have been done before we get to the, okay, punishment phase of like not really doing it. But I think right now we still need to get a little bit more information to tell people this is really what you need to do. And I think when we talk about clinical trial diversity, another component that comes into it is regulatory. When we talk to different groups and they're saying, hey, you know, we want to give someone an iPad to monitor their own blood pressure at home, will that impact another federal law? And so I think we need to take a more, we are starting to look at a comprehensive approach regarding federal laws to make sure that the intent of helping people improve their clinical trials by giving them different maybe tools, helping them with parking fees, don't necessarily put them in jeopardy of another rule in law. So there are a lot of things we want to get from the researchers. And that's another thing that we will talk about is, can you allow for online follow-ups? Can you do evening and weekend hour requirements? So we want to know what is happening, right? Because I think right now we still, from our level, still have gaps in knowledge. And so that way we can really enforce the studies and make sure that studies reflect the population.
Can I just offer, there are two things I want to offer. Donney, I wanted to speak to your point about diverse researchers, because when we're also talking about that education component, we're also talking about education for the evaluators of the actual whole model, the clinical trial itself, to have understanding of like what education or what diversity in a clinical trial would be, right? And I think that is one of the ways that it presents a vehicle to be able to have more diversity in who is running the clinical trial. And so I just also wanted to speak directly to the logic model part of the question, because a logic model makes me think evaluation and these things specifically that we're going to evaluate. The bill also asks that the secretary put on the website the disaggregate numbers of this is what the trial was shooting for, this is what the trial got, and this is what the plan is to move forward. So there is a level of transparency in terms of like, here's the prevalence, this is who we're shooting for and why. So it's really nice to, especially as Megan said, like we're looking for like these best practices and these standardizations to think about like, okay, we'll be able to actually build off of the results that other people have had and their successes and their failures. So
you guys brought up some great points. And one of the things, I've been part of a lot of clinical trial learning networks looking at design and engagement and recruitment strategies. And there's always a conversation where we talk about suggestions of how to design it based on community needs. And then the pushback is, well, IRB says that we can't do this or we can't do that. And when we want diverse patients, one of the bare minimums is having information in their native language, right? So now the requirement, Cecilia, you pointed out the issue of low literacy in our country. But what's the mandate to really address health literacy in more of a culturally competent? Because if you do a basic Google Translate, that's really not going to help anybody. You're not humanizing or the experience to really be relatable. Because you both mentioned how everyone's a person. They have friends, family, and they have lives, and they want to feel like they're being seen and heard. So when we talk about clinical diversity and getting these underrepresented communities engaged, they've been taken advantage of for so long. So now what is the accountability from that standpoint of making sure that the communication strategy does follow the class standards for health literacy, also is focusing on that cultural competency component?
No, I love that question. I lived in El Paso for 2 years, and we were just trying to get our consents in a manner that people could understand. And I remember I used like this very formal translation service, and I presented it to my chief nursing officer in the hospital, and he pretty much said, no one's going to understand that in my hospital. And I was sitting there like, well, what do you mean? And just things like dialect, right? We were serving a more North Mexico population. But then what if there are other people from Southern Mexico or Spain? And we had people from all over in our hospitals. And so that was a moment for me of just understanding the different dialects, right? And so we want to make sure that there is enough flexibility, because people need to understand their population, because what works in North California might not work in a Southwest Texas. And so health literacy is so important. I don't know if I said this at the beginning, I used to do hospital administration. And one of the things that we did in our organization was look at our patient population that was coming into our doors that we were serving and saying, what are the top languages that are coming into our hospital? And so we were like, we had everything in English and Spanish, but then honestly, after Spanish was Amharic, and no one knew what that language was. And so we're like, apparently we're serving this population, yet we have nothing for them. And so, I think health literacy, making sure it's translated in the language that is appropriate and culturally competent for them is so important. So, from our perspective, it's not necessarily us putting this in this piece of legislation, but it's saying, hey, you need to survey your population, what you are serving. And if there is a language that you need to translate your material into, you need to do that, because that is the way to get people educated, to be able to want to participate in the trial. So that is like top tier, so important. But in this legislation, we can't mandate that because we need people to look at their population.
I think really that's the beauty of the bill. And Donney, I want to circle back to something that you said, like, so, thinking about having a community in there, thinking about having potentially members from the community in there, we have this lived experience that will inform the questions that we ask. It'll inform the ways, like, we're already going to bring in whatever the education background it is we have, but also that lived experience background. And that's actually what we're very much, relying on our community stakeholders to bring us, right? Because we're going to, I think, we think about sometimes cultural competency as being a destination, and it isn't, right? We're always learning from each other, right? And even as things happen, there are things like, we think about the trauma, of the interactions that people have had with healthcare providers in their community. We think about actually the very recent trauma of COVID, right? We're still doing that, right? So thinking about the learning and unlearning that we have, thinking about the biases that we have on both sides of the table, and thinking about really being able to be in conversation about those things, about why we might not move forward, why we might not engage in asking questions, why we might not be willing to participate. And I think really one of the bigger things is being willing to have those conversations. Like, so to think about trying to be inclusive from the ground floor, it means that we're already making space for those uncomfortable conversations. And I think that's like a beautiful thing. And I think, like Megan said, we're going to be thinking about the specifics of where we are to make sure that the conversation we're having meets what it is we're doing. Now, thinking in fact, like, we know that they're going to be generalizable, but we're also thinking about, if we have community members, those community members are also going to help us with that recruitment, so we can speak to the needs of the communities that we're in.
And sorry, I jumped back in, and, to what a point that you asked, Donney, one of the things that I realized when I was doing my dissertation, I went into my community, right? I did research. My dissertation is on spirituality and African-American women and the association with breast cancer mortality rates. So I went to my community and I was like, hey, I want to know how we can present information in a more culturally competent manner. And I want to use an organization that has been a staple of my community for so long, right? The church was the place where a lot of civil rights movements, conversations happened. And so it is a staple, and I was rejected. They rejected me from this community. And, I'll be honest, my feelings were hurt. I was like, I want to do something good. I want to do something and bring healthcare to you in a manner that I think has been neglected. And the reason I was rejected was because I was a researcher, because the community said, you always come in, you always take all this information from me, but you never do anything. And so I think that is the gap that we're trying to fill right now, is the doing. And, of course, we need a little bit more knowledge. We need to make sure that we're engaging the right stakeholders. We need to make sure that we are able to break down some of the federal regulatory barriers that are seen, some of the clinical process barriers that are seen, but we need people to understand that we are trying to do. And I think once people grasp the fact that we need to make that additional step, they will also want to participate, because let's look at some of the studies. Let's look at some of the data. I mean, our communities aren't even spoken to about the clinical trial, right? And so a lot of people will say, I would have done it if I was educated about it. I may have participated, but a lot of times in these conversations, it's not even brought forth. So I think that there is this element in the bridge that we need to build in like the do. Right? Once I see you really trying to include me, once I see you extending that olive branch, the actions, you're saying a lot of words, but let's get to the actions that will build that bridge into our communities. I really think we will start to see that change, because, just as a lived experience for me, it did present some backlash, and I had to go through and educate them of what I am really trying to do and really trying to accomplish, because I want to see healthcare come out of the proverbial four walls, because I believe that healthcare is in the community. When you look at the social determinants of health, 20% of healthcare is actually acute clinical care. It's everything else. It's your air quality. It's, do you have sidewalks to take a 30-minute walk? It's everything else. And so as we think of what is next steps for healthcare, I definitely think that we need to start thinking differently about how we do.
So Megan, you brought up some really good points. And one of the things I want to harp upon is the involvement from community-based organizations. As a community-based organization, and having been in the space for a while, I could tell you a lot about tokenism, where you said you only need me when you want something, but after that, after you got what you need, then you're out the door. And so for us as a community-based organization, there was a lot of tokenism where we're not allowed to actually have voice, provide input. So when we're looking at the mandate for requiring training for clinical trial researchers about this topic of diversity, is there an opportunity for community-based organizations to be the ones leading those trainings? Because if we have lived experience actually, working with the community, we don't want to be a token. We want to be a collaborative partner. And that's part of what this bill, from reading it, it seems like it's to create these collaborations, but what's the accountability to where, community-based organizations, according to like federal, grant opportunities, shouldn't just be a checkbox that some big researcher will say, yeah, we got a community-based partner, but then they have no active involvement. We're just going to give you hush money to just, sit on the side. Where is that community-based organization being more of a direct community-based organization, faith-based organization, whatever group that's impacting these communities in a direct way? Where is their power? How are they given equity in terms of the conversation?
And that is, I think, what we are trying to build with this bill. Like, we are saying these people are here, right? They just need the resources, and they need to be able to go out. One of the things that we recently spoke about was in the maternal health space and rural maternal health programs. But when you look at a lot of the grants, a huge chunk of the country was left out. I think it was the Kaiser Family Fund who did this study. And so states like Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia were left out. And so, we were kind of digging, and you look at organizations, some of these organizations, they're doing a lot of great work. They're doing the work. They don't have the resource for a policy person to know when all of these grants come out. They don't have the resources to know about all the federal funding. And I'll say from our perspective, we try really hard to do that, right? When my boss is going to the church and the communities, I have her with a sheet of paper saying, these are the maternal health grants that are out. Talk to them about it. Here's the mental health grants that are out. Talk about it. Here's all these things that we need our stakeholders to apply to, but we also recognize that all of our stakeholders don't have the same resources, right? Organization that's in our district that, does a lot of great HIV work. They're like a staff of 3 and you're trying to make them aware of everything, apply to these grants. And so, I think that is part of us, on our job to do more education when we go out to our districts and our communities to make sure they are aware of the federal funds and opportunities that are out there, because we do need to be making sure that these funds and holding people accountable to making sure the dollars are doing what we intended it for it to do. A lot of times we're in this space and we see all these trillions of dollars come out, and then we take a survey and we look and we're like, did we move the needle? And so we definitely need to hold people accountable, but I definitely think we need to make sure that we're giving people space to mess up at the very beginning. Like Cecilia said, we will have failures in this space. And so we need to have a little bit of time to where people are like, okay, this isn't just a talking point, right? This isn't just giving money, having tokenism, just saying hush. We need to give people the time to say, this is not going away. We care about clinical diversity. It needs to start from the very beginning. It needs to be inclusive. And so getting people to realize this is not going away. You need to do this. This is the expectation. And then we definitely need to bring in our stakeholder counterparts and make sure they are well aware of what's going on so they can do the work and get the funding and the grants, because they do a lot of the work.
So I think if I may just add on, oh, there's so many things I want to say. The first thing I want to say is in the same ways that the harm that's been perpetuated in research didn't happen overnight, the unlearning of that mentality is also not going to happen overnight. So in the same way that Megan is saying that this is a bridge, it is a bridge, right? And it's going to require effort from both sides, right? Anybody who says, well, this is how it's been and that's how it's going to be is not helping us move this forward. So I think, one of the most amazing things that community organizations can do is understand that in this bill, we're saying clinical trial sponsors should be partnering when you would already be talking about how to meet the people in the neighborhood, right? So in some ways to say we want your knowledge, we're already telling you that what you have is valuable. And we're asking, community-based organizations to see that as value, to understand their value and push. And I realize that's not an easy ask. I mean, for the same reasons that Megan said, research has come in and been extractive, and we are asking for labor, but we're also saying that, this labor is something that is supported at a federal level to make sure that your community is going to get some redress. Right. In the sense that we are talking about being able to help to try and get you some participation to make sure that these, the drugs that are going to be tested, the biologics, the behavioral health interventions, consider you and consider your needs, right? And consider just the different biological makeup or, that is specific to you. And I think I just really wanted to score, I think this is something that is going to take time. I think that we're going to see how this evolves because right now, as this is theoretically written, it's amazing. And when we put it out, we are going to see those power struggles happen, right? Because researchers are going to have to concede power for this to work in a way that we want it to, in an ideal way. And so, when we talk about this education piece, there is this retraining, and not only just the academic, that knowledge learning, but the heart learning and the willingness to say, okay, we can share. If both of our goals is to help the community, then we have to think about here's a place where you're strong and here's a place that I'm strong, and be able to rely on each other in that way.
Those are excellent points. A question for you both now is, we talk about clinical trial diversity. So say in this ideal world, the bill gets passed and we have more people participate in clinical trials. Now, life after the clinical trial, a lot of the big concerns is accessibility and affordability of the therapies that are discovered. Because you can't ask people from underrepresented communities to say, hey, participate and find, helping us discover new therapies. But then when it comes all right, thank you for your participation. Now here's something that's so out of reach, it's unaffordable. Because some of the new drugs that have come to market, it's a sticker shock. If you look at the price of some of these new therapies, and a lot of it are for specialized conditions. So Megan, you alluded to how there are some rare diseases that have smaller group of people that are impacted by it. But the ticket price for the cost of treatment is outrageous. So now how do we address accessibility and affordability when it comes to therapies, especially when it's NIH funded, which means taxpayer funded dollars is what led to this discovery. So as a taxpayer, I don't want to be taxed twice.
I just want to jump in and say, you don't have no problem asking the hard questions. So thank you very much for that.
No, and I think we believe in this office, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can look for diversity and we can fight for lowering drug costs, and that's the beauty of, this work is that all of the above. We need to make sure the research is being done in a diverse manner, but then we also need to look at how do we lower out-of-pocket drug costs, and what does that mean, and what does that look like? I mean, we're starting to see that, right? We were very fortunate to get the Inflation Reduction Act across the finish line. We're starting to see, drug companies lower their cost of insulin to $35. And now that's a population that, it's targeted like the Medicare, but now everybody can benefit for that. So we continue to need to move legislation to help people be able to afford these drugs. We need to avoid things like the step therapies, right? Saying we know this drug might be the benefit, but we need to go make you do 1, 2, and 3 before we'll give you 4. Those are things that impact the pockets. We need to protect and strengthen programs like the 340B program that allows for people of underserved and under-resourced communities to be able to get these drugs from their healthcare systems. And, when we talk about accountability, we're starting to see things pop up in the news, and that's not what that program, those programs are for. These programs are not supposed to be sent to communities that really don't need it. They need to be in our program. So those are the ways that we can shift the dollars back back to make sure that, you know, the cost of drugs are lowered to a manner that is affordable for individuals. And so there is a lot of work that we're trying to do behind the space and behind the scenes that isn't necessarily in this legislation to decrease out-of-pocket costs for individuals. But those are the continuing battles that we have to try to fight for. So we make sure that people aren't continuing to pay ridiculous amounts of money out of their pocket. And I did see a question. I just want to make sure that we get to that as well when we were talking about grants. It's grants.gov, I believe. I'll double check that, but you know, it's a filter function too, so you can type in like mental health, whatever type of grants you want to look for. And so, you know, that's where you can get the information. And so there are a lot of things that, yes, the organization will ask you to provide certain documentation, and you might have a storing component there, but the information is there. But we also just need to put out education that the funding is there. And so I'm always just trying to talk to my constituents about one of the things that apply here is just how the process works, right? When people come to us in June asking for appropriation requests, I'm like, well, the process is closed. And so I really try to hard for my constituents to teach them about all the opportunities that they can access. And I know that's something we try to do really hard on ILO too. So we believe in continuing the fight to help lower drug prices for people across this country. And I think those are just some of the examples that we continue to see as a win, but other things that we can address.
I just also want to offer, because I want to bring back to the point that like every representative in Congress is somebody that you elected by your vote or your lack of vote, right? So you also think about if they're working for you, you can reach out to the district offices. They have resources, right? You can reach out to them. And I think too, like we want to, every congressperson worth their salt wants to hear from their constituents about the things that bother them, right? Some of the reasons I think we've seen some of the pushes that we had forward wins is because constituents have said, this is a problem. So like, it's not that you aren't getting heard. And I know the wheels aren't moving fast enough because you needed whatever you needed yesterday, but we need to have your voice. We need you to keep raising your voice to make sure that your congresspersons are working on the issues that matter to you.
Those are all great points. The other thing, you know, some of the questions that are coming up in the chat is talking about how to make the process easier for community-based organizations to apply for the grants. Because when you read, if you go to the federal funding websites, there's a lot of technical aspects to it. And if you don't have a grant writer that has experience in applying for, you know, the federal funding, it becomes a limiting factor. You know, what are the efforts that can be made in order to make applying for these grants easier for community-based organizations? Are there going to be more technical support opportunities, or just kind of a way to apply the health literacy lens to the whole application process, making it easier for us to know exactly what's required and how do we deliver upon, you know, the expectations?
And that is the beauty of conversations, right? And this is one bill, you know, like we know that this is a multi-pronged approach. And so let's have the conversations. Let's figure out when, you know, when NIH and the federal government is putting out comment notices on how they can better a process, let's make sure we're getting the word out so people can get the input in to be able to change those processes. And so, you know, from my perspective, let's have the conversations. Let's see what we can do to make it better, because we are that conduit. So yeah, this bill doesn't specifically change that, but there seems to be, and the need is identified to need to be able to move that needle forward. So let's have that conversation. Let's see where we can lean in and see what additional education is needed on our end to move that needle forward.
One of the questions I was in the chat was saying that there seems to be a discrepancy between the way that the bill has been introduced in this House and the Senate versions. Can you explain the difference between the two bills?
The bills that were introduced for the 118th were the same. That might be the 117th version where there were differences, but through technical assistance and additional conversations, we have smoothed the language down to be similar, the same legislation.
Okay. So I'm just looking at some of there's been a lot of great conversation in the Q&A. So I've been trying to make sure I brought them up as we went along. So there was an interesting question that was proposed in how, in a double-blinded study, somebody gets a placebo, somebody gets the actual drug. So once, the study is concluded, how do you convince somebody that got the placebo to actually get the real drug?
I'm sorry, did you say, how do you convince the person?
How do you convince them to get the real dose?
Oh, okay.
So, we know that, you got the placebo, through the trial went through, we figured out, the discovery that the new product does work. How do we convince the person that thought they were getting better or may have not gotten any better to now go and get the real medicine?
Okay, we both. Okay, so, at least from the scientific studies, I know there's not an IRB alive that would say if you've benefited from this, that there's something written in the IRB for them to even let you do it, you have to give it. So I think there is a matter of when you, and this is something I think that happens in doctor's office or anywhere when you're doing research. When you consent, you want people to understand there's a chance that you will not get this, because we have to see, when we're doing a clinical trial, thinking about this education piece, the clinical trial is we're testing this drug. Some people will not get it because we need to know what happens if somebody doesn't get it. Some people will get it because we need to know what happens when that people do. We are going to study the results. And if this is beneficial for this population, we will make sure you get it, because we would not be being fair to you to test you, know that this is beneficial and not give it to you, right? And then on the other side, there may be some consequences. Maybe this won't work, right? But we're telling you that we're wanting to try to see kind of where it is so we can fail forward, if you will. And I think even when we talk about the education component, that's it. And so even from the question, I know that there is not as much transparency in the research process as we would like it to be, because just like for the grant language, we're writing for each other. Researchers are writing their consents for researchers, right? Because researchers approve them. When we think about the grant language, I won't say that we're writing it specifically for the agency, but we are thinking about the ways that we communicate in this culture and the acronyms and all of that we use. And I think sometimes it's just a matter of, which is the beauty of the education part, we're going to reground each other in the things that we need to have. Going back to what Megan said, we're going to be in conversation to make sure that we are understanding the ways that we speak differently.
Excellent. So now, what are some of the key takeaways that for the people attending the webinar can actually help support the bill, but also help support the work of clinical trial diversity? What are the tangible action steps that we should be looking forward to?
Conversations. Let's keep having the conversation. Let's keep having the dialogue. I mean, everything that you brought up today is something that we can take back, right? We can help say, hey, the website is cumbersome. People can't really access them. We can take back, hey, we need to look at better ways to support our stakeholders who want to do the good work and educate and get to the people. Hey, what can we do with our consents, our informed consent process? The terminology that is used. These are all things that we can take back to try to say, what else can we do? How else can we make this process better for layman's people? And so, some of the things that we've done is, I can just say in the hospital side, is sometimes we've seen the main consents, but then we have another version that is complementary to it that really spells it out in the layman's terminology. So what are those things that we can do to help? That might be just an addition, and a small addition. So you can have the technical terminology for what you need on the scientific side, but you also have the community-based focus side. And so, what I would tell people to try to take away is, we need to move this needle forward. And we already have some traction that happened with the DEPICT Act and the FDA. We definitely want to see more traction in the NIH side. And so this bill is the step forward. This bill will say, you need to look for the participants. We need to make sure that you have measurable goals. We need to know what strategies you are looking for to find these people, because a lot of times in our work, we meet with so many people and we see the people. And so who are you talking to? What are you analyzing? What are the ethnically appropriate terms that you're using for this research? And like Cecilia said, I'll just piggyback, this is going to take time to turn the ship around, but we need to make that bridge and we need to do it now. So what I would say is, get out there, let's talk about it. Let's talk about this bill. Let's talk about the other elements of the spectrum, because this is only highlighting one part. What additional things do we need to talk about? And so, our office is open. We want to do the work. We want to hear you. We want to support you. So please let us know also how we can support you.
I would also offer, go to the Clinical Trials Diversity website. The beta version just came out. It's supposed to be more user-friendly. It'll tell you about clinical trial things that are happening in your community. I think being able, talking to your family members about okay, COVID just happened. Why didn't you go get that? Why, even to start having those conversations about why people might have hesitancy and starting to break down those barriers, or even uncover your own biases, I think is really important, because it's not just them work. It's not just over their work, right? It is everybody, like I said, being willing to really look at what their own barriers might be to participation, looking at the things they don't know and the things they want to know, because that's going to help us have a conversation, right? If we assume, I think it's really important that we don't assume that everybody knows everything. And we really start trying to be very intentional about bridging the gap between what we don't know, and really the ultimate goal is making sure that we can be as healthy as we can be. That is a goal that is built. I think that's a goal of everybody, right? Everybody want to live their best life. So really thinking about the ways that we can be in conversation to make that a reality.
And I think I saw something float in regarding bill numbers. So on the House side, it's HR 3503. And then on the Senate side, it is S 1701.
Thank you. So one of the things that, a lot of questions are talking about building trust within the community, making things more simplified for lay language. What can we take away from the lessons learned from the NIH All of Us effort? Because sometimes what we discover is that things are done in silos. There's something, being heavily invested and outreach has been done, but then we don't necessarily take the lessons learned and then apply it elsewhere. And there's been a lot of money and a lot of effort invested into the Precision Medicine All of Us, program. How do we take what's been done in there and build upon it? Because that was really focusing on building trust for everyone.
Yeah, and that was a program that I learned about just by scrolling on YouTube one day, right? And so that was the way that my mechanism worked. And so Cecilia and I talk a lot of times is, how did Megan Thompson find this information before working here on the Hill and having access to a lot of briefings and information and people seeking you out to make you more knowledgeable? And so, I definitely think that program did a really good job at looking at the nuances. We have to recognize that social media is here, and social media is a tool that can be leveraged. We always, a lot of times in the conversations that I have is the negative impacts that it can have, but let's utilize it for the good. Let's utilize it to improve health outcomes. Let's utilize it for mental health well-being. We have to start looking at all of our avenues. And I think that was one of the things that program did very well. Like, I found that program mindlessly scrolling through social media, and I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? Let me look into it. And I was able to share it with other people. I've seen it shared in circles where they've targeted like the Divine Nine, fraternities and sororities, their partner there. They looked for the HBCUs. And so those are some of the simple strategies that have been used over and over again, because there is a mechanism there and there is a function there. And when COVID-19 happened, once again, we saw that and we activated that mechanisms. We said, hey, Divine Nine, hey, fraternities, sororities, hey, HBCUs, hey, faith-based institutions, we need to get activated because we need our people to know about what's going on. And so once again, use them, activate it, because those processes are there.
I think it's also really important to think about the fact that this organization did that, and I work for this organization, and every time somebody approaches, we're having a different conversation because they're coming from a different context. Like, I think about Megan's example as a researcher. Even if you go to a research community, or you go to a community where, my own research is going to be in Cleveland, Ohio, they know me from Cleveland, Ohio. I happen not to have a relationship with a university in the community, but when I've approached that community, I know that I am associated with the university I'm with. I know that university has perpetuated harm. I have to be willing to have that conversation. So every time it's I won't say a reintroduction, but I think there's something about really being willing to come into the space and not say, well, that work's done, so now we don't have to do that. No, you don't. You have to be willing to start at the ground floor and build those trust relationships. Because just like Megan said, yeah, you can absolutely leverage the pre-existing ties, but people also want to make sure that when they spend their relational capital is good. So really thinking about being very intentional about like, these are things that they learned. How can I use them in my own research practice? How can I use them as a community setting when I'm going to be in conversation? If these are the things, these are the standards that we should hold people to, what does that look like when we are engaging in research relationships?
Yeah, excellent points. And so I want to put in the chat some resources that I think are important for everyone to share. So the first resource is Finding Clinical Trials through the NIH. It's an excellent website with information about how to find current clinical trials, but also if you want to sign up to be a volunteer, either as a volunteer participant in a clinical trial or a volunteer researcher. So there's a lot of information, and it's a matter of knowing where to look. And the other resource that I put in the chat for you is from Fast Cures, which is part of the Milk Institute. They have this excellent report that was published this past April that talks about mapping the journey, building a mutual understanding of health equity in clinical research. It gives you not only the practical background knowledge about clinical research and functional solutions. We often keep talking about the problem. We can keep stating the problem over and over again, but we need to be more solution-oriented in nature. And this report from the Fast Cures at the Milk Institute is really good at giving you a visual depiction of the clinical trial journey that a patient or a consumer might go through, but also more of the context of how to work with them to navigate the pitfalls. You know, there's a lot going on, but I could tell you as a community-based organization, the big request that I would have for both Megan and Cecilia as you go back to Congresswoman Kelly and advocate is community-based organizations, we need funding. You know, we are often the front line providing all the services to those that need, but we lack the resources to be sustainable. You know, they always say that no money, no mission. And that is true. You know, the people that we are supporting, you know, through our organizations are very mission driven, but we have to have the funding to allow to retain the talented people that we all have currently. And that is a huge request that, you know, if there is in future bills, I could say that there has to be more equitable funding being appropriate to community-based organizations that are involved in giving so much. So it's not just that it's a one-hit wonder, you show up, you ask us for something, and then never to be heard again. We want to be seen as active participants in the process, you know, going forward. The other thing, you know, before we close up for today, is the NMQF, they announced this past October the launch of something called the Alliance for Representative Clinical Trials. And this is an effort that's right now been launched to help unite clinical research and improve clinical trial diversity. So while this bill is being proposed and we're trying to get it to be passed, the NMQF has been actively participating with researchers to focus on you know, building clinical trial learning networks, training future clinical researchers, and really walking the talk and kind of helping to implement some of the key parts that the bill is highlighting. So I'm going to put the press release for this announcement that happened this past fall in the chat for you all. But there's a lot going on. There's a lot of moving pieces and parts, and it's important that we are active, we come together, and let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's figure out how to build and those bridges that are going to be meaningful in forming action and not just providing lip service. Because I think we can all say talk is cheap. You know, we've heard it enough, and now we need to see like actual functional changes to go through. So Megan and Cecilia, any last words while I try to find the actual link for the press release, because the link I put is not working.
No, I just say thank you for this conversation, for those dialogues, for those questions, because we need to make sure that what we are doing gets the outcomes that we want. And the outcomes that we want are healthy individuals that can partake in the innovation that is being created. And so for everyone on the call, please let us know ideas. I always say, you know, this is step one. This is one of the steps. This is a building block. And we know that, you know, healthcare is a spectrum, and there's so much more we can do in this space. And so we're willing to lock arms with you to figure out how to get this done. And, you know, one of the things that Cecilia brought up that I always like to highlight as well is let us know the failures, right? Failures are only just to learn from what we can do better. So we stand in partnership with you and collaboration with you, and we hear you when we're talking about community-based organizations and needing funding.
I just also want to offer that this is an amazing step, right? I won't say it's the first step because it isn't, right? I think there have been numerous steps, and I think we're going to we're going to continue to walk forward. The fact that people came here and asked questions, the fact that we know that this legislation only targets one part of the process, but if we can get this across this finish line, it puts us in the space to be able to look at those other pieces that we need. And so we really do, like Megan said, appreciate the feedback. We want to make sure that we continue the conversation, and we really can't push your concerns forward if you aren't telling them what they are. So definitely encourage you to reach out to your congressperson, whether it's our Congresswoman Robin L. Kelly or your own, and let them know about your concerns, because those are the things that are going to help drive this forward, get the sponsorship, and help us get it over the finish line.
Well, thank you, Cecilia and Megan, for having this wonderful discussion about the NIH clinical trial legislation. We're hopeful and looking forward to getting it passed. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for this Friday. Hope you have a great rest of your day and enjoy your weekend. Bye, everyone.